Evening, I'm Nadia Jama, one of the GB5 on the Labour Party's NEC, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this rally tonight to kick off the May Day weekend with speakers from around the world and why we need socialism, unity and internationalism. This week, we paid tribute to International Workers' Memorial Day, and as socialists, we know that trade unions fight for safe work every day, as is a right and not a privilege. We remember every worker that has died and pledged to keep the living safe. So this event is hosted by Tribune magazine and Arise, an online festival of Labour's left ideas. Here in Britain, we need to build resistance to the Tories and to build for support for socialist solutions. But for the struggle to be successful, we have to understand our struggle is not alone. All around the world, many governments like ours are still failing to protect the health of people in this pandemic. And alongside this, the far right around the globe is resorting to scapegoating. And all around the world, as you will hear from our international speakers tonight, people are not only resisting the ruling class, but fighting for a better future. And in places such as Bolivia, they are winning and starting to build it. We need to link up with all those fighting the ruling class, as well as for progressive alternatives. Links between socialists, internationally, and our international values of unity, hope and solidarity are more important now than ever. So, due to an amazing level of interest, as well as this Zoom webinar, we are streaming live direct from the Arise YouTube page and over a dozen Facebook pages, including Tribune's. Our speakers for this celebration of socialism, unity and internationalism tonight will each speak for 5 minutes. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, the awesome and amazing Apsana Begum, the MP for Poplar and Limehouse, one of our brilliant new socialist MPs from the 2019 intake who fights for us all. Apsana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and thanks so much for those kind words, and well done to you and the JV5 for all the work that you're doing to represent us and our movement as well. Thank you so much for having me to speak on such an important day. I think this year, workers across the planet will commemorate May Day in one of the most traumatic periods in recent history. Unfortunately, there is a real sense of dissatisfaction, even despair, I would say, in workplaces across Tory Britain. In the UK, our government has run down our communities and torn away our rights in order to attempt to create a very cynical dog-eat-dog world in which only the rich can flourish at the hardship of others. Employers, we can see, are disgracefully using fire and rehire tactics to weaken working conditions, including in my constituency last year towards council workers, many of whom are ethnic minority women. Not only does that represent an attack on the rights and pay of workers, but it really does expose the deep systematic failures of the law on which workers' protection is based. Now, whilst it's true that the pandemic would have always been a challenge to any society, the Tories' approach here in the UK has been utterly reckless and callous. And as usual, it's workers who've paid the price. And as I speak, I know that many thousands of workers feel pressured to return to their jobs, even when they still risk spreading COVID-19. Over and over again, workers have been let down by this government and their astonishing litany of failures, resulting in really heartbreaking tragedies and suffering, and so far too many preventable deaths. So as we read and celebrate workers all around the world tomorrow, we must continue to struggle for the rights, income and safety of all workers, from postal workers to doctors, from bus drivers to cleaners, to supermarket shelf stackers, to nurses and migrant workers, to carers as well. And this includes celebrating diversity in the workplace and defeating discrimination that so many people face because of their gender, their age, race, ethnicity, cultural background, disability, or sexual orientation. Right from the beginning of the pandemic, it was really clear to me and so many around me that Black, Asian, and ethnic minority workers were facing a particular risk, a specific risk, as they so often work in insecure jobs with fewer rights at work. Black and South Asian people particularly do a major work in the areas where there is a greater risk of illness and death. And whilst discrimination and structural racism continues to dictate who gets dumped on and who gets resources, it's always these groups that suffer events worse. We've been speaking about these issues over and over again, and the government here have been warned and advised, and to be honest, they've been begged literally to do the right thing. So not only has there been a failure to step up and recognize that all lives matter, and by that I mean Black lives matter and Black lives must matter, the Tories here in the UK insult us with their denial of institutional racism and the structural inequalities that divide us and protect the rich at the expense of the poor. But we know it's clear that there are these systemic economic inequalities that mean that those ethnic minority communities are unfairly disadvantaged, and that this comes after years of devastating austerity. Now, on top of this, there are the real problems with the protection of human rights in the UK, which the government ignores when it is preaching opportunistically around the world as per its economic interests. In many areas, particularly in the spheres of immigration control, national security, counterterrorism, freedom of association and freedom of speech, and the treatment of persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups, UK legislation itself has been frequently the subject of criticism from experts in the UN Human Rights Committee and from the Council of Europe as well. And we've seen this intensify in the last few years. We know internationally as well, the Global South continue to overcome the destruction caused by imperialism and disproportionately shouldering the burden of the global climate crisis they did not create. And rather than cutting aid and funding in the UK, cutting funding for those countries is happening, and we should be cancelling those damaging levels of debt for those low-income countries. Our internationalism must acknowledge the role of British colonial injustices as well. So, comrades, we really must resist. It should be for everybody obscene that the death toll continues to rise here in the UK and that profits are pocketed by a rich few. I'm sick and tired of looking around me and seeing the pain and injustice, and that the hard work and creativity of people and workers goes unrewarded. We need socialism. That means we march together, we struggle together, and we stand together in order to make a reality of having an inclusive intersectional reality and recovery out of COVID and the pandemic, and really deal with those entrenched inequalities. That needs to be sooner than later. I'm with you on that. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, Apsana. Such an important contribution there, calling out the effect of austerity and Tory policies that have affected our class for decades, and the institutional structural racism that's denied by the Tories, which is an absolute disgrace. Okay, so thank you. We're going to move on to our next speaker now. So Ian Lavery, MP, former party chair, co-founder of No Holding Back, and a great fighter for working class people. Ian, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nadia. And can I first of all say a big thank you to Arise and Tribune for arranging this fantastic array of speakers for the Mayday rally. And I think there's going to be some excellent points made. Listen, we stand on the shoulders of giants. A solidarity, love, roses, flowers to great comrades across the planet who are fighting for injustices of whatever nature. The massive message of solidarity, letting people know that we are behind them, despite the dark days of COVID. Let us just mention COVID, because there's huge issues regarding our colleagues and comrades and friends and brothers and sisters right across the globe with what looks to be developing the vaccine apartheid. You know, listen, what we're seeing in India at this moment of time is heartbreaking. It's worse than heartbreaking. And we cannot allow that to happen. The rich nations of this country, of this world, this planet, the sixth richest economy in the world, we cannot allow stockpiles of vaccines for third and fourth doses. whilst people in the likes of India and Africa coming on very soon, suffering so badly. Did anybody see the two young fellas with their dead mother in between them on the moped? That's what internationalism's about, comrades. It's about making sure those people are well looked after. We put our arms around people across the globe. It's socialism, it's internationalism, and we should never, ever forget that. A big call out to people in the countries of Cuba who've done fantastic work with the medics they've got, again, across the globe. A big shout out to the Venezuelans, the South Africans, the Colombians, right across the globe who have been amazing. You know what, Nadia? It does get you pretty angry when you look to see what is happening across this world. What I did the day I looked at the banners of the past to just remind me of Mayday and what the messages of Mayday actually mean. And, you know, it was fantastic, by the way. And I want to just take the time just to mention and recite some of the messages on the banners, the trade union banners, which have been paraded the length and the breadth of this country since the beginning of the 19th century and possibly before then. In 1932, the National Union of Public Employers, what a great message. Organise, agitate, educate. Letterpress printers in 1888, knowledge is power. Another brilliant one from 1832, the cabinet and chairmakers. Let tyrants tremble while justice holds the scales. Honest industry is the strength of society. What about in 1832, the friendly Sawyers? Through love and unity, we support each other. And you know, one of my favourites is the National Union of General Workers, Tottenham branch. Producers of the nation's wealth, unite and have your share of the world. Now, their messages are brilliant. What about he that would be free must strike the blow? What about light and liberty? Unity is strength. What about organisation is security? What about bear ye one another's burdens? The list goes on, Nadia. It's absolutely amazing what we saw before us and the messages we take from there. That's 200 years ago, and they're even more important now than they ever were. You know, we've got huge challenges here in the UK. We've got huge challenges nationally, regionally, nationally, and indeed internationally. And we've got to make sure that we address them the best. We've got to stand proud as socialists, you know. Not shirk our responsibilities, not leave the field of play, not leave the field of battle, but we need to be standing shoulder to shoulder with each other to support the policies that Jeremy Corbyn had in 2017, in 2019. That's what people are wanting. They want change, and we've got to stand proud, head high. There's a world to be won, Nadia. Let we get out there, don't mourn, organise. The past we inherit, the future we build. Solidarity.
Awesome, Ian. Absolutely love that. Your passion for socialism spurs us all on. And a great point about the vaccine apartheid. You know, the family transporting their mother was heartbreaking to see. But you're calling out there what real internationalism looks like. And I feel like I'm at a big meeting, so thank you for that, comrade. Okay, so moving on to our third speaker this evening, Dave Ward, the General Secretary of the Communications Workers Union. You know, the CWU are a fighting union and a union that stands up for our rights as Labour members too. And it's great to have Dave here with us tonight. So over to you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia, and hi, everybody. Really a pleasure to be able to speak on this eve of May Day rally. We come together to recognise the historic struggles and achievements of the labour movement and working class people. I also recognise completely that this pandemic has exposed inequalities in so many ways that I have to say is the worst that I've seen in my lifetime. There's a deep-rooted structural imbalance of power and wealth, and it permeates the world of work, it permeates how the economy operates, and also, as we've seen, in wider society. And the key question that faces everybody in the labour movement is, what are we going to do about it? I don't think that the current Labour leadership can answer that call, but I do believe that the left, united, and the trade union movement stepping up to play its part can. And I want to make a number of commitments tonight about what we're going to do and how we turn those ideas of socialism, those ideas and policy platforms that Jeremy, John, and the leadership of the Labour Party gave us in that manifesto into action. And for me, the commitment that I want to make is that we will step up the fight for a new deal for working people. The US president has shown the way. Sleepy Joe has become the action man. He's going to take things forward, and it's time that we, as trade unionists, as Labour members, as socialists, took up that fight with action. And what I mean by that is a number of practical steps that I commit that we will put in place, and we are working now to get other trade unions and other trade union activists into the same place. And I know a lot of them feel the same way. One, common bargaining agendas across sectors of the economy is a fight that we can win. At this point in time, I'm pleased to say that CWU, GMB and Unite are talking about that very thing, and we hope to announce soon that we're going to set standards in the post and logistics sector of the economy that is actually growing at the moment. Standards of employment. All unions that operate in certain sectors of the economy can join that fight by cooperating in setting those standards and going out and fighting to achieve them. We need to agree shared political and industrial demands. Those demands must also tackle racism, and the commitment that we make tonight as the CWU, and we've started that process, we will take that fight against racism into the workplace. Our job is to unite all working class people, and trade unions are in the place to do that. And, you know, the policy platforms, I don't know if you saw it, but the CWU made an intervention recently. And we did it on the basis that we felt that the current Labour leadership are missing the point on too many occasions. And we tested in all places Hartlepool of what sort of policies. We took two, one close to our hearts, well, both close to our hearts, renationalisation of Royal Mail. Over 65% of those polled thought that was the right policy. We also talked about free broadband, a policy that was ridiculed only about 18 months ago. Staggeringly, 67% of people supported that policy. We've got the ideas, we've got to turn them into action now. And we also commit to organising a demo later this year where we will challenge Johnson and the Tories on what levelling up really means. And it starts with levelling out the power and wealth of the establishment of the big financial institutions and of all of those people who aren't playing their part in building a fairer world and a country. So look, get behind the New Deal for Working People campaign. Trade unions need to lead that. That's the commitment that we'll make, and I know you'll support us in doing that. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. It's awesome to see the CWU winning for its members and committing to fight for the rest of us, fighting for socialism. As you say, Dave, our 2017 and 2019 manifestos were immense. They were life-changing for millions of working class people. So thank you for that. Thank you for your commitment. Okay, moving on to our fourth speaker this evening, it is Sam Browse. Sam is an Arise volunteer member and Labour Outlook volunteer, as well as the person who performs the best rendition, in my opinion, of St. Patrick's Battalion. So over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Nadia. Socialism, unity and internationalism. Those are the three watchwords of this Eve of May Day rally. And they're well chosen, I think. Politics has changed a lot since that wet and miserable day in December 2019, but nothing has fundamentally changed in the nature of the multiple crises we face. We still face a crisis of faith in our democratic institutions. The Green Seal scandal, the cosy chats with vacuum cleaner millionaires, and the luxury makeover of Number 10. This isn't just about a few dishonourable exceptions. It's symptomatic of a culture which is rigged in favour of the rich and wealthy, a culture that's writ large in the ink of the Serco contracts and the agreements with NHS privateers reaching back decades. It's inscribed in our history books, the history of imperialism and British exceptionalism, leading to the Bengal famine, the Balfour Declaration and the bombs on Baghdad. And it's written in the paucity of their attempts to get to grips with the climate emergency, in the refusal to invest in the renewable energy, the infrastructure, and the workforce needed to radically transform our economy and meet our zero carbon obligations. So the crisis of democracy hasn't gone away. The climate crisis hasn't gone away. The crises in our economy and our public services haven't gone away. And the COVID crisis has made them all worse, in fact. And for as long as they continue, so we should continue to argue for the socialist solutions that we know would remedy them. Because we're not alone in that struggle. From the women on Clapham Common fighting for their right to walk home safely, to the Black Lives Matter demonstrators tearing down memorials to the mass murderers of our imperial past, to all those fighting against a policing bill which is designed to persecute the traveller community and crush the right to protest. People are rising. And our task is to join them. It's to join all those who are fighting the rigged system, the workers organising against fire and rehire, the healthcare workers organising for a 15% pay rise, those in the gig economy fighting for higher sick pay and better paying conditions. And it's not just there, because if all these crises, the economy, the pandemic and the climate emergency show us anything, it's that our struggles are international. Just as we would support a picket in Liverpool, we should support those struggling for socialism in La Paz. And yes, let's take inspiration from places like Bolivia, where a year after a coup, the left have regained power. And I hope it's the start of further victories across the continent of Latin America. So as we approach this May Day, let's continue to fly the flag for socialism, for unity in our movement, and for an internationalism that stands in solidarity with all those fighting for a world that puts people before profit, because we still have that world to win, comrades. Thanks very much, Jeff.
Thank you so much for that, Sam. Brilliant, giving us the hope about how the left regain power, and that is so important to us all. So moving on to our first international speaker this evening, we have Daniele Obono, member of the French National Assembly for the left-wing La France Insoumise, sometimes translated as Unbound French Party. She is an internationally well-known and fearless campaigner against inequality, racism and war. Over to you, Daniele.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel on the eve of May Day. We're a day before celebrating workers, and I think it's important to remind ourselves what actually helped us be here today, what actually helped us fight back and resist in it's been over a year of the pandemic. And as we celebrate workers on May Day, let's celebrate all the workers who faced and fought for us during the pandemic. First of all, of course, healthcare workers, but also all the invisibilized workers, the cleaners, the transport workers, those who helped us when we were under lockdown, and those who showed actually what the world rely on to actually function. And I think it's important because it's been very difficult days for a lot of people. A lot of people have died. A lot of workers have died because they were at the forefront of the fight against the virus. But it was also inspiring to be seen and to be shown how important ordinary people are for our world to actually function, how we rely on those who are despised and invisibilized, and how utterly useless are millionaires and bankers and people at the top when it comes to actually stand up and resist. And I think it's that should inspire us to look forward, because we're far from over yet the pandemic fight. We know now that they're in the midst of this terrible moment when a lot of leaders pretended to realize what was wrong with the world. And especially in France, we had a president who said that no matter what, we will the money and we will look back at the era, our ways. But as soon as the idea that we could get over the pandemic arise, they are just back to their old way. And what we see with, for instance, what's happening with the vaccine and the appalling choice not to give free the vaccine, and not to accept for the world, for the entire world, to be able to access those vaccines, especially. And I think about what's been happening in India, especially, show how much the people who govern us are only inspired not by the strength of the worker or the solidarity or our common humanity, but they are only inspired by the need of profits. And that's only one fight we still have to carry, because, as many other speakers said, the climate crisis is far from over. Inequalities have been rising during the pandemic. The multi-billionaires have gotten richer, even richer, obscenely richer, while people have been literally starving. Even in European countries, even in France, you had students lining to get free food because they couldn't survive without the solidarity of the people giving free food. So this is the reality of the world we're facing. We're not safe, and we're not over the pandemic as long as anybody around the world is not safe. So I think the fight for access to vaccine worldwide is, I think, at the forefront of what we have to fight for. We also have to stand against the authoritarian turn that some governments have been taking, because I'm talking about what has been happening in France over the past years. A couple of days ago, former generals, far-right generals, actually called the army to rebel against the political power. This is an unprecedented action from people in the army and from far-right people, because they feel free to do that, because over the past month and over the past year, using the pandemic as an excuse, there have been a lot of regression on democratic rights. A lot of governments used the pandemic to lower freedom, to enact a state of emergency, and to use it in order to consolidate some authoritarian response. And we shouldn't think that it's just a temporary measure, because we know that that's the only way forward for them in order to keep people from rebelling against inequality, from demanding more rights. So I think that's also on the task we have to fight in solidarity with people all around the world who are facing authoritarian regime, the people still facing colonization, and I'm thinking about people in Palestine especially, but also people in Uyghur people and all those people fighting against authoritarian regime. And I want to end with really remind ourselves the task ahead. The task is can look enormous, but as was shown by us by worker, ordinary people during the pandemic, we got the power. We are able to do our own, to organize in order to fight back against not just a virus, but against the government who are trying to take over. And I think that's one of the most inspiring lessons that we have to remind ourselves. So have a good Mayday tomorrow, have a good march, and let's keep resisting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for drawing attention to the workers that are ignored by the ruling class, who have absolutely been invaluable during this pandemic, and why internationalism is so important. And thank you for the work that you're doing in France. We send our solidarity to you all. Okay, so on to our next speaker now. We have Kamel Hawwash, chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who is a British Palestinian engineer academic based at the University of Birmingham. And I was able to visit the West Bank and the Jordan Valley back in 2018. So I know how important our solidarity is to our Palestinian brothers and sisters. So it's great to see Kamel on the panel tonight. Kamel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Thank you very much indeed. And many thanks to Tribune and Arise for asking me to contribute to this Eve of Mayday rally. And both thank you to Nadia and to Daniele for mentioning Palestine. The issue of Palestine still tests the international community and those who believe in justice. How is it that the people who lost their homeland 73 years ago and who continue to struggle for their freedom still live under occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid today? Yes, friends, the three descriptions can accurately be thrown at Israel. Only Trump and his administration thought that there was no occupation in Palestine. They've gone, but Israel continues to use that administration's language and illegal gifts, including the recognition of the Golan Heights as Israeli territory. They continue to do that. But they entrench their occupation and intensify the oppression of the Palestinian people, especially in Jerusalem. We recently saw the brave Palestinians in Jerusalem in the month of Ramadan defy the occupation and won an important victory, which forced Israeli security forces to remove barriers erected at the Damascus gate. But that is not the end of the matter for the Holy City, which is important to all of us. Israel is busy changing its character, its look and feel, to turn it into a Jewish city and to eliminate its Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim and Christian character. It does this through limits on building permits for Palestinians, the withdrawal of residency permits, limiting the Palestinian call for prayers, and by planting Jewish-only settlements in East Jerusalem. It won't allow the Palestinians to claim back the homes they were evicted from in Jerusalem in 1948, but evicts families from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, replacing them immediately with Jewish settlers. That is a war crime. In other areas in the West Bank, a de facto annexation through the expansion of illegal settlements and the theft of more Palestinian land goes on unabated. Gaza remains under a siege that has become almost permanent, subjecting the Palestinians there to the most oppressive forms of control, including fishermen who could literally be shot while earning a living in their sea. 2 million people in what the former Tory Prime Minister, who's recently been in the news, David Cameron, called the largest prison in the world, but he did nothing about it. Israel makes the lives of Palestinians so miserable that they hope they will leave of their own accord. It's even scuppered the Palestinian elections last night, planned for May, July, and August, because it will not allow Palestinians in Jerusalem to exercise their right to elect their representatives. Remember, this is the self-proclaimed only democracy in the Middle East. Its forces, the self-proclaimed, again, most moral army in the world, protect settlers as they heap violence and terror on Palestinians in their homeland. Reports from the Israeli human rights NGO B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch painstakingly analyzed Israel's practices and concluded that they amount to the crime of apartheid. Human Rights Watch also concluded that Israel is committing the crime of subjugation. Amnesty International is about to launch a report that will come to the same conclusions. Israel is an apartheid state. Will the world heed their conclusions and act on their recommendations, or will it will the Palestinians once again be left alone? I was delighted when the Trade Union Congress passed a motion which mentioned Israeli apartheid for the first time in a motion that supported the Palestinians. COVID was mentioned, as Israel comes out of COVID, proudly saying that they managed to defeat the pandemic. They send vaccinations to countries that will move their embassies to Jerusalem instead of passing them on to the Palestinians that they continue to occupy. The Palestinian health system is at breaking point. And that is something we must really remember. It has Israel international obligations that it must meet. Not only could the Palestinians be left alone, but be denied their rights to resist their occupier because Israel labels them as terrorists and their supporters as anti-Semite. We will not be silenced by the pro-Israel lobby. No movement that purports to be in favor of unity internationalization can show solidarity with people around the world as they seek justice, but shy away from the Palestinian people. We must be forceful in our support of the Palestinian people. It is time weasel words of condemnation and expressing concern were backed up with sanctions that will make Israel take notice, as it has over the investigation that the International Criminal Court has opened up into its crime. Ask yourself this: why are sanctions applied to Russia but not to Israel? Let us commit to raising solidarity with the Palestinian people until they are free. For as Nelson Mandela said, but we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people. Thank you so much for your solidarity.
Thank you for that, Kamel, and we send you our solidarity. On to our next speaker this evening. We have Gyekye Tanoh, who is based in Ghana. He spoke at the brilliant Mayday event last year and is from the Hand and Brain African Activism Initiative and the Third World Network. Vaccine inequality and the deepening debt crisis facing much of the world is why the campaigning he does is so important. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and thank you, comrades, for organizing this important get-together and discussion and reflection about our way, the challenges we face, and the way forward for us. The challenges, obviously, if we look at them alone, they can look pretty overwhelming because they're horrible. I mean, what a horrible world we live in if we left it to our ruling classes. Here we are with a pandemic, never a better moment for global solidarity, for mutual support, for coming together to look for common solutions to common problems. And yet, what do we find? We see this vaccine nationalism. We see the exploitation of imperial power in all manner of ways. The big pharmaceutical companies, backed by the likes of Bill Gates and the British government, standing against the loosening of intellectual property rules in the World Trade Organization that will enable, different production capacities to be brought on stream, different governments to use their public health interests and their regulatory power to license pharmaceutical, new production of not simply vaccines, but all the various other kinds of medicines and equipment that we all need. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the powers that be in the world, on the one hand, are celebrating what they see as a return to normalcy, what they see as a return to economic growth and profit making in a quicker time than they expected. At the same time, they're wringing their hands about what they call the Great Divergence, the fact that there are parts of the world, entire countries, entire regions, sections of every society in the world today where people are being excluded from this recovery. We see in places like Africa the toll that this has taken. The IMF and the World Bank claim that last year 100 more million people were driven down into the deepest mire of abject poverty. 35 million of these came from one region alone, that is Africa. And yet you find that African countries that are trapped by rising debts cannot get their bondholders to sit around a table to agree some degree of moratorium, let alone cancellation, which would be the just thing to do. We see what is happening with governments like Boris Johnson's government, which is running, pell-mell to sign up new trade agreements with countries like Ghana and other countries in Africa, and yet cancels, overseas development assistance in areas such as water, sanitation, research that affects coronavirus responses, and so on. Anything that will give an extra profits and competitive advantage, new markets to British companies, he's prepared to do. Anything that will entrench and enhance the possibility of coordinated, democratically influenced, public resource, centered investment and decision making, he is opposed to that. And that's why we find that this is impacting the power of ordinary people, not simply vis-a-vis governments, as many people have said, but vis-a-vis the companies as well. I was very glad to hear the representative from the British Communication Workers Union talking, and as he was speaking about deploying the power of the union, deploying the power of a section of the organized working class in such a positive fashion, he inspired the thought of how much further we could go with that line of action. In a country like Kenya, for example, one of the countries that is in the unenviable queue of repeating some of the conditions that we see in India today in relation to the COVID, the pandemic, is a country that had to beg Vodafone, a subsidiary of Vodafone, a British telecommunications country, not to pay out its full dividends for 1 month because their profit levels of their monopoly over digital financial services was so huge that it would break the back of the Kenyan economy, in the sense that the sheer volume of capital outflow will actually lead to a crash of their currency and lead to all manner of distortions. An area like this, where the Communication Workers Union, just like the Education Workers Union, just like every other section of the working class, just like those who are engaged in the struggle for eco-socialism and for a sustainable world, people like that who make demands that can impact the global reach of workers, can impact the global reach of the footprints of British companies and the British pathways of profiteering and so on. I think we all stand to gain from that. If the Communication Workers Union stands shoulder to shoulder with Kenyans to demand that the profits are not repatriated and are reinvested in Kenya, that will be 100 times better. If they stand for policies such as universal basic income that are truly meaningful and are based on redistributive principles and empowering people in terms of their production capacities and meaningful livelihoods, that will be beneficial. If we make demands in terms of food security, in terms of the environment, if we make demands in terms of rights, race, ethnicity, religious minorities, sexual minorities, and so on, I think that all of us will be empowered in every corner of the globe to contribute to a better and just world, and to empower ourselves to confront those who will visit on us, not simply pandemics, divisions, misery, racism, and so on, but they'll also burn our planet to the ground before they give up a cent of their profits. So I salute you all for this effort. I salute you all for bringing us together, reminding us the scale of our problems, but also reminding us that together we can make an enormous difference. So forward with the struggle. Have a great May Day tomorrow, and let's continue the fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for highlighting the cruel inequality and the capitalist greed driven around the vaccine. Capitalism is literally killing us, and we must resist the vaccine patents. But yeah, our collectivism and our solidarity will get us through with the trade union support. So thank you so much for that. Our next speaker is Sarbjit Johal from the South Asian Solidarity Group. She will be speaking about the inspiration and the vital strikes and struggles of the Indian farmers against the reactionary Modi government. Over to you, Sarbjit.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to first, of course, thank the organisers, Arise and Tribune, for inviting us to speak on this eve of International Workers' Day. As everyone's already identified, at this moment, the situation India is so bad. We can't really think about India without thinking about the terrible tragedy unfolding there, with people dying there. People have no medical aid, no oxygen, no vaccines, nothing. The government has abdicated all responsibility. For people who don't know the background, it might be difficult to make the link between the farmers' protests, but actually it's not in reality that difficult, because the roots are the same. The farmers' struggle has been about their livelihood, ultimately about a life and death struggle against a Hindu supremacist ultra-right government underpinned by corporate power. Their struggle was fueled by their anger against the Modi regime. They're protesting against the farm laws passed by the BJP government. These laws give profit-hungry corporates the power to take over the entire agricultural sector. They increase the exploitation of people's labor, and they'll destroy the public distribution system where economically weaker sections are provided essential commodities. And don't forget, they don't have a public health service. And they'll force Indian farmers to stop growing food and force them to produce for global agribusinesses. It means India will become a dumping ground for expensive food grains produced in the West. The farmers are resisting the entire takeover of farming land by big businessmen like Mukesh Ambani. Ambani is hand in glove with Narendra Modi. He is a big donor to the Tory party here. He owns Hamleys, the toy shop in London. Ambani bought the iconic country club Stoke Park. You might know of it. It's the same place where James Bond movies and the Netflix series Crown was filmed. The pandemic is an even more terrible example of this nexus between corporates and Hindu supremacy at the cost of people's lives. The BJP's own Parliamentary Standing Committee on Health and Family warned of this second wave in November last year. Despite this, Modi government did nothing, and it carried on exporting vaccines, exporting oxygen, no plans to stockpile essential antiviral medications. And from tomorrow, the 1st of May, the government has decided it's going to allow drug companies to fix their vaccine prices. Adar Poonawala, the chief executive of the Serum Institute, will be free to carry on and pursue his desire for super profits. And we know what that means. It means no vaccines for poorer people. The government has decided that vaccine manufacturers will provide 50% to central government, and the rest will be available for sale to states and agencies on the open market with no price controls. The states don't have any resources to buy these vaccines. The government has abdicated responsibility. And it's ordinary people who are helping in this dire situation. The same trade unions which had come together in solidarity are fighting the pandemic. The same activists, some of them with draconian charges against them. They're looking after those who are struggling to breathe. The pandemic has shown the way we are all linked, and the virus knows no borders. The farmers' protests also highlight this, with the same corporates funding the same right-wing Tory government. That is one reason we as the left in Britain must support it. The struggle is continuing. It united the people of India across castes, regions, religions, women and men, agricultural workers, industrial workers, students, and now these farmers are reaching out to migrant workers who are fearing long lockdowns. They're fleeing Delhi by droves. They are inviting migrant workers to come and stay in their own tents and shelters, to stay with, they say the states, come and stay with us as long as you need. We're here for you. It's the most inspiring worker struggle of this century. South Asia Solidarity Group is urging British MPs to sign a letter to Prime Minister Modi about his handling of the coronavirus in India. Especially urgent is the issue of the vaccine pricing. It's a subject of particular relevance for us here in the UK because Britain has a moral responsibility to make the details of the deal between AstraZeneca, the Oxford and University of Oxford and the Serum Institute of India, an Indian company, which is the world's largest manufacturer of vaccines, publicly available, and to hold to account companies that are profiteering from the knowledge that was publicly funded in this country. This is a situation which is leading directly to the loss of hundreds of thousands of Indian lives. Please urge your MPs to sign this letter. We also have a petition for all progressive people everywhere to sign, urging Modi government to prioritize people's lives and not corporate profits. And we can send you this via any of the social media contacts. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing such an inspirational story of the farmers' strike there and the struggles against such a pernicious government. You know, the current virus catastrophe due to their mismanagement is just horrendous. And I hope our MPs will support your request by signing your letter. So thank you for your contribution tonight. Okay, so our next speaker is Nathália Urbán, who is a Brazilian journalist and BrasilWire contributor. Massive resistance is building in Brazil to the far-right President Bolsonaro and his disastrous response to the pandemic. You know, there's no mistake here, is there? All of these far-right governments really badly handling the pandemic. You know, we stand with great resistance in the left of social movements with Brazil. So over to you, Nathália.
Thank you. Before start, I would like to stand in solidarity with Rodrigo Pilha, a Brazilian that has been incarcerated for protesting against Bolsonaro. Rodrigo Pilha is being subjected to physical torture in prison just for solely stand and peacefully protesting against the genocide committed by Bolsonaro against the Brazilian people. Brazil is going through its darkest period since the redemocratization that during the end of the military dictatorship. The health crisis due to the pandemic has already killed more than 400,000 people. The current environmental policy has taken deforestation rates to the highest level of the last 30 years. 52% of the Brazilian people are living under food insecurity. Hunger, fear, and difficulties imposed by Bolsonaro's necropolitical government are destroying Brazil and the Brazilians. But we still have hope. The Brazilian court recently decided to annul Judge Moro's lying convictions, and Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva again we were able to run as president in 2022. The polls so far are very optimistic and show Lula as the winner. But we have to remember that the same people who removed the Workers' Party from power in 2016 are still around. The same imperialist international governments that insist that Brazil and any other countries in Latin America cannot seek its emancipation are also aligned with the most reactionary sectors of local politics, which includes the British government. So it's necessary that socialists from all over the world remain united and stand in solidarity with Brazil. I would like to say that once Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff said that dreams do not die, they collect for a while to soon be dreamed again. And us Brazilians are desperate for waking up from Bolsonaro's nightmare and be able to once again work together with a progressive government to build a fairer country for everybody. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear about the fight back and your hope under such circumstances. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight. And we all long for the return of Lula in 2022. So solidarity, sister. Okay, so moving on to our next speaker, we have Marisa Matias, Portuguese Left Bloc MEP. Marisa has spoken at a previous Arise event and is well known across Europe and beyond for speaking up for equality, workers' rights and a better world. Over to you, Marisa.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and thank you all. It's a huge pleasure to be with you again in these joint fights. And of course, the May Day is a very, very good moment for us together again and to try to continue our fight and our resistance together. I have to say that I really thank you all for the moving words and the inspiring movements across the world. And I'm pretty sure that we as Europeans know that we are in countries that in this moment of pandemic crisis will stay in the wrong side of the history, kind of building a fortress against the global south. And this is another way of a huge crime that we are committing in these days because of vaccines. But I just want to say a few words on what brings us here together. And of course, we all know our difficulties become even more difficult with the pandemic crisis. It was already said, and it's true, that a lot of people were really affected by this pandemic crisis, in the sense that we know that the pandemic crisis does not affect everyone in the same dimension. So the those who are the poorest or people working with precarious conditions, the carers, the migrant workers are for sure those who were more affected. And so we saw raising unemployment, we saw raising precarious conditions, we saw a lack of protection for workers, all the sorts of abuses for workers in this last year with the pandemic crisis. But this has to remind us that unity of our movement is the key issue for our future tasks. We cannot move on without this unity. We can also not forget that the 1st of May is the most celebrated day across the world. It is celebrated in so many countries and is the real face of our internationalist fight and our struggles. We know that because it was the outcome of the true conquer of poor women, poor men, of workers across the globe, and it was not the outcome of any decision of any government. It was, in fact, the victory and the fight of anonymous people. And in this moment that we are fighting again in such a difficult crisis like the pandemic crisis, and so many people not having their rights achieved, we need to know, and we need to know them, and we need to know their conditions, and we need also to recognize this as the moment for anonymous people get back again to the fight and to conquer again the rights. And we need to be on this fight for sure. I think that you all know that in my country, we are not able to celebrate May Days since long time now. We only started to have our celebrations, the first freedom celebrations, less than half century ago, after the revolution in 74. And still today, the first demonstration of the 1st of May was the biggest demonstration in our country. The second biggest demonstration was when we had the Troika intervention in Portugal and we were fighting against austerity. So all the elements are still here, and all the capacity to fight is still here. We are always fighting in very difficult conditions, but this movement that we are organizing and we are participating is a true global movement with really a need to reinforce again the role of anonymous people and the role of workers and the role of workers' rights in the center of our societies. We know that we can only do that through socialism. That's why we are here together. So thank you again so much. And sorry for such humble words, but I really was quite impressed with all the important and so magnificent speeches before me. So thank you so much.
That was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for drawing attention to the links that we share, that we've all seen: unemployment, precarious work, frontline workers, all the effects of the inequality this pandemic has further highlighted. Our solidarity, as always, is yours. So thank you for tonight. Okay, so moving on to our next speaker, we have Ronan Burtenshaw, who is the editor of Tribune. Make sure that you support and subscribe to the Tribune publication. It's essential reading for all socialists. So over to you, Ronan.
Thank you very much, Nadia. So when I was asked to speak here tonight, the first thing that came across my mind was the question of May Day and what is May Day and what does it mean? Because we say a lot of things about it. We talk about May Day being the workers' day, and that kind of gets bandied around an awful lot on the left and in the socialist movement. But it means something very important. Then all of those 365 days of the year is the one day that is truly for us. And that means it was the first day to make a dent in the great calendars of the religions and the monarchies, the first day that was not given its imprimatur by gods or kings, and not in any one place either, but across the face of the world, where we have over 100 countries with a public holiday for May Day. It was, as Eric Hobsbawm said, a day that was established entirely by that unofficial movement of poor men and women in every corner of the globe. And we have the question of, what does it celebrate? Because when we talk about the labour movement now and the organised workers movement, it can seem to a lot of people that it's abstract. But May Day does not celebrate something abstract. It celebrates a movement that is ours, a movement that has given us those things that makes our life worth living and our societies worth living in. It was the organised workers movement that ended the divine right of kings and broke the torturer's rack. It was the organised workers movement that came together in Lancashire to fight against the institution of slavery. It was the organised workers movement that sent people to protests and had people die for the democratic rights that we fight for today in Peterloo back in 1819. It was the organised workers movement that won the right to protest in the first place and broke the hangman's noose. The organised workers movement that sent people out to say we have a right to protest against the authorities without being imprisoned or killed for doing so. And it is the organised workers movement that fought for all of the rights that we have in the workplace, that fought for the 8-hour day, that invented the idea of the weekend, invented the idea of a holiday. It is the organised workers movement who we can turn to thank that our children are no longer working down the pits. It is the organised workers movement that extended our lives by shortening the amount of time we had to work, improving the conditions where we had to work, and giving us that power to fight in the workplace. It was the organised workers movement that built the NHS and tore down the slums, fought for women's rights to vote and the right to equal pay, and fought for our own culture, built institutions that gave people the space to express themselves beyond just the workplace in other areas of their lives, institutions that still stay with us today. It is the glorious tradition of modern history. And when we say in Tribune that the cause of labour is the hope of the world, that's what we mean. At this time of deep disillusionment, I think that is a very important message, because people need a beacon. They need the idea that there is a hope for the world, and the organised labour movement can provide that. The right of politics, the right-wing forces, those reactionaries, big business interests, they feed off our despair. They feed off the idea that things cannot get better, and our movement is living proof that that is not true. Our movement shows that it is possible for ordinary people to fight and win and improve their lives when they organise together. And so when we go out as representatives of this movement, when we go out and we extol its virtues to people, we have to be able to say with a great deal of belief that we stand in a tradition that has changed the world and that we can change it again. We can win homes that are worth living in and break the power of the landlord class, that we can give you a job worth doing in a workplace where you are empowered. We can beat the bosses that deny you those rights. We can have cities and towns that are worth living in and stop capitalism destroying the planet in the process. We can make schools and hospitals that are palaces and give dignity to every person regardless of their position in society. There is nothing that the power of the organised workers movement cannot achieve, no horizon that is beyond it. And a city that is set on a hill cannot be hid, as a man once said. And so our job is to go and build that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ronan. Awesome as ever. Love the historical overview. It's important that we know our history and the struggle of those before us who fought for those workers' rights. As you know, nothing was given to us. We had to fight for it. I just would like to say again, please make sure you subscribe to the Tribune magazine. It plays such an important part of our socialist political education. Okay, so moving on to our penultimate speaker this evening. Richard Burgon, MP, Secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks very much, Nadia, and thanks to Tribune and to Arise for organising this rally and for ensuring that it stands in the finest traditions of International Workers' Day with speakers from all across the world, because the last year of pain and suffering that's affected our communities all over the world underlines just why our struggle and our movement must be an internationalist one. A year ago, as the COVID crisis hit, we heard all sorts of rhetoric about how this crisis would bring us all closer together, how this crisis would be a catalyst for positive change. 1 year on, we can see that was a lie. 1 year on, we have had over 100,000 people unnecessarily lose their lives from COVID in our country alone. We have seen the corporate takeover of the state with a growing stench of corruption as billions in COVID contracts are handed to those with friends in high places. We've seen the crisis used as cover for further privatisation and outsourcing, with track and trace handed over to Serco and the like. We've seen the crisis used to drive down wages and drive down conditions through fire and rehire. We've seen attempts to pit public sector workers against private sector workers as a ploy to force down public sector pay in a race to the bottom. We've seen school children left without enough to eat, many on furlough, paid less than the minimum wage, and disabled people given insulting 37 pence benefits increases. This crisis has shone a spotlight on the deep failings of 40 years dominated by neoliberalism, marketisation, deregulation, and privatisation. So this must be the moment. This must be the moment when we ditch all of that and build a better society. People agree with us. They want change. The polls show people want a more inclusive, fairer, more equal society to be built out of this crisis. But to win a progressive alternative, we have to build the movements and we have to fight for it. If we're really going to learn the lessons from this crisis, then we have to fight for a society that serves the many, not the few. So let's fight for a 15% pay rise demanded by NHS staff. Let's fight for a proper pay rise for all public sector workers and for a real living wage of at least £10 per hour for all workers. Let's fight for an end to fire and rehire and an end to 0 hours contracts. Let's fight for a Green New Deal with millions of good, unionised, skilled jobs at its core. Let's fight for 1 million council houses. Let's fight for a social security system that ensures a dignified minimum income guarantee. Let's fight for a right to food. Let's fight for an end to all NHS privatisation and for a national care service. In fact, let's fight for the popular manifestos Labour stood on in 2017 and 2019 that have proven to be needed now more than ever. And let's demand a windfall tax on the companies that have made super profits during this crisis and a wealth tax on the super wealthy too. And if a centrist president in the United States can announce the end of trickle-down economics, if Joe Biden can announce massive investment in green energy, in modern transport, in high-speed broadband, in health and social care, in social security, if he can announce taxes on the super rich to fund this, well, then that's the very least that the Labour Party needs to be fighting for. Now, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, our struggle is an international one. The capitalist class acts globally, and we need to be linking up our struggles across the globe. We'll only beat the union busters like Amazon if we organise together. We'll only stop the tax dodgers if we work together. And we'll only prevent the worst effects of climate change and keep global temperature rises below 1.5 degrees if the developed world meets its global commitments. That means not just doing its proper share so the world can halve emissions by 2030. That means delivering on the £100 billion per year commitment to help developing nations cut their emissions and cope with the impacts of climate change. As well as the global climate threat, I'm very worried by the military plans of our government. Boris Johnson's new integrated review of defence is a dangerous new global vision. Tens of billions more spent on the military at the same time as cuts to public services are planned. When we should be supporting multilateralism and cooperation, it risks dragging us into siding with the US in what appears to be a new Cold War with China. And Boris Johnson boasts he's going to expand the number of nuclear warheads by 40%, ripping up decades of gradual disarmament. If we are to spend billions more increasing the number of nuclear weapons, then what's to stop others also doing the same in a new global arms race? There's lots more on international justice that I'd like to talk about, from the US ending its inhumane blockade of Cuba, to justice for Palestine, the global Black Lives Matter movement, and the need to end the war on Yemen. But there is one global issue I especially want to draw attention to at the moment, and that is vaccine apartheid. 83% of all vaccines so far have gone to richer countries. As it stands, it will be years before the rest of the world is fully vaccinated. Are we just going to stand back and allow what's underway in India and Brazil to continue? We can't allow tens of millions of lives to be put at risk. Most countries don't have enough vaccines simply because the technology is being controlled by a handful of private companies. It's in private hands, even though the vaccines only exist because of massive public investment. To save lives, we must allow the poorer countries to produce their own supplies of the vaccines. And that means backing the call from over 100 countries to temporarily waive the vaccine patents and share the technology. Yet Boris Johnson's government is working hard to stop this demand in the international forums. It's a disgrace and it's costing lives. So let's resolve today, on the eve of May Day, to build the biggest global movement possible for a people's vaccine as part of achieving what we all want to see, a world that puts lives before private profit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Richard. Inspiring as always. And yes, we absolutely have to fight for our socialist agenda. We know that will be life-changing for our class, so solidarity. Okay, before we go to the last speaker, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on the panel for participating tonight. I'm already looking forward to next year's. Tonight has been amazing. I'd like to thank all of the Arise volunteers, particularly Paddy, Sam, Matt and Siân. Thank you so much for putting this together. And I guess really we know we have an important battle ahead, and we also know just how important our campaigning for people, health and the planet to be put first is. You know, we must build the resistance to the Tories and promote socialist alternatives, and internationalism and the values of May Day are vital to this. We must keep working together to insist that there is no return to business as usual when it comes to our economy and politics. And we must fight together internationally for an end to war, racism and injustice. A better socialist future is possible. We have a world to win. Let's do it together. I'm just going to give you a bit of information about a number of events that are coming up, some Arise events. So the next one is the 17th of May, and that is the cause of women is the cause of Labour. You will get the chance to meet the 6 socialists that are standing for the Labour Party's Women Committee, and we must elect socialists to get our socialist agenda progressed. And then on Saturday, the 12th of June, we have the Socialist Solutions to the Crisis with a range of speakers, including Diane Abbott, Laura Pidcock and John McDonnell. So I'm going to hand over now to close the event tonight. The person that inspired millions around our socialist agenda, the best 2 manifestos ever, the 2017 and 2019. The reason I went from being a Labour voter to an active Labour member. The MP for Islington North, the one and only Jeremy Corbyn. Over to you, Jeremy.
Nadia, thank you very much. And thank you for the kind words you just said and for the brilliant summary you gave of what May Day is about. And thank you to all the speakers, because it's been an absolutely brilliant occasion. We've learnt to do things online. We've learnt to do things looking at computer screens. And I'm sitting here in the empty office of the Project for Peace and Justice, speaking to hopefully thousands and thousands of people. Next year, we'll be doing it physically, but let's also make sure we also do it online as well, so that nobody is excluded from our events in the future, because that has been, I think, an important lesson of the whole COVID issue. Big thanks to Arise, to Tribune, and to Jacobin Magazine, the partner organization of Tribune, for the message they give in the USA and the work that Tribune does, because having an Eve of May Day rally like this is so important, so we can educate ourselves and, above all, enthuse each other in our determination to achieve change. It's our day, May Day, our day. A day for remembering the purposes for which we exist, the struggle against poverty, the struggle for justice, the struggle against racism, all of those things which are core values of the labour movement all around the world. The Black Lives Matter movement, established on the back of the police brutality and killings in the United States, has galvanized a whole generation of young Americans to recognize the dangers of the police power and the racism of the society in which they live. And Black Lives Matter has led to a recalibration of understanding of history. And it's enthused people all over the world who see in their own oppression something similar to what Black Lives Matter has done in the United States. So that means our universal, total condemnation of racism in any form. Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, far-right racism, all racism has to be opposed. It's designed to be divisive. It's designed to divide the working class movement. And I can't be the only one who was beyond shocked and appalled when I saw footage of fascists marching through the streets of Kiev the other day, commemorating the Waffen-SS who collaborated with the Nazis in the Second World War. I support those people in the Ukraine that have stood up against these fascists, just as I support people all over Central Europe that have stood up against the growth of far-right racism there. But it's also the day-to-day struggles of racism in all its forms all over the world that are so important. And the promotion of an understanding of what colonial history was about, what the slave trade was about, what slavery was about, the diminution of human values in order to get people to pass by on the other side, whilst the most grotesque attacks in history were done against Black people to become slaves to go to the Americas and make the wealth for the City of London and so many other places. So let's dedicate ourselves to a recalibration of history, and don't be put off by condemnations by British papers about what they call anti-colonial history. We have to understand what the brutality of colonialism was. And the struggles that go on today, the struggles that Kamel spoke about of the Palestinian people for their recognition, for their statehood, for their right to exist, and for Palestinian refugees to be allowed to return. These things are vital and so important. It's these struggles that unite us. Likewise, opposing the war in Yemen, the feeding of that war by bombs, by planes, by missiles, by high-tech weaponry sold from Britain, from the USA and other places in the past to Saudi Arabia that have been used in order to kill the people of Yemen. Wars have consequences. It's easy, and I've been in Parliament when it's happened, for politicians to get into some nationalist, xenophobic rant and decide it's a good idea to have a war in the Gulf. It's a good idea to have a war in Afghanistan, a good idea to have a war in Iraq. And then, after the troops have gone, after the troops have been killed and after many more civilians have been killed, it fades from the headlines, yet the horrors carry on. The extremism and the terrorism that's born of these conflicts carries on, and the refugee flows carry on. There are now 80 million people on our planet who are refugees, driven from their homes by poverty, by economy, by environmental disaster, and by wars and human rights abuses. That's the largest figure ever in recorded human history. And on the 22nd of May, the Project for Peace and Justice is proud to say we will be enabling the voices of refugees from all over the world to be heard together. There will be many speakers from different refugee communities in different refugee camps all over the world, telling people what it is like to lose your home, to have to live in a refugee camp, to risk all, to cross the Mediterranean, English Channel or somewhere else to try and get to a place of safety and then be condemned for trying to survive. Refugees are human beings, just like all of us, who need to be recognized and supported. They are also part of the cause of the Labour movement. There are so many things that unite us together. And I was so pleased that we had speeches in support today of the Indian farmers, because their struggle against the capital globalization that is affecting Indian agriculture and being promoted by the Indian government is in reality a struggle for people all over the global south against the way in which big pharma, big business, big corporations take over local services, take over farming and destroy the ability of people to produce their own food and have to import seed strains or indeed food from elsewhere. Our support today, our message to the Indian farmers is we are with you. And by the way, you've made history already by having the largest ever industrial dispute on the planet, 250 million people on strike in support of them. COVID has shown in raw daylight what global inequality is about. It's the poorest that have suffered the most. It's the poorest that have died from COVID by and large. It is those that have been exposed to it. And it's shown in our own society the inequalities and injustice. It's all very well for the Prime Minister to say, work at home, it'll be okay, just work at home. Fine. If you've got a decent house, nice place, garden, working at home, and you've got an office job, not too bad. If you've got a large family and you're in a private rented flat and your kids are having to share a bedroom, what chance have they got of studying at home? What chance have they got of catching up on schoolwork? It's shown the inequalities and the mental health stress that's come as a result of it. And whilst furlough was a step forward and we pushed very hard to get furlough, it's still a wage cut. It's still a loss of earnings, and statutory sick pay and universal credit are still far too low. Yet the very richest in our society, the very richest in our globe have done actually very, very well out of COVID. The redistribution of power and wealth in favour of the wealthiest is writ large in all the struggles on this. And so it is up to us to expose all that and invest for the future, an equality-based future, a future that works for all. And so our job is to try and unite people, but unite people in struggles that are so important today. The police bill, taken with the Overseas Operations Bill, and other bits of legislation this government is pushing through are deeply oppressive of our right to organise, our right to march, our right to demonstrate, our right to speak out. Let's dedicate ourselves to campaigning like we've never campaigned before to defeat the police bill because of the threat it is to the civil liberties of all of us. And to challenge what this government is doing. The ill-named Defence and Security Review is actually one that increases the number of nuclear warheads, which is in contravention of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but also in total opposition to the general world movement, which is for a global ban on all nuclear weapons, and increasing defense expenditure by 24 billion, whilst cutting overseas aid, which is likely to improve people's living standards and help important things like access to safe sanitation and water. And promoting, this is for the labour movement, promoting a green industrial revolution, not by threatening people's jobs, not by threatening living standards, but by promoting a green industrial revolution which protects the planet, protects biodiversity, and increases jobs, green, sustainable jobs. It won't ever be done by free market economics or private enterprise. It will only be done by public intervention. That is what our manifesto was about in 2017 and 2019. Public enterprise, public investment, but above all, unleashing the imagination and power and organization of people to live in a better world and deal with the housing crisis and all the other crises. But two things, and I'll finish on this. One is we need to talk to each other and listen to each other. We're doing it in this way, we're doing it online, and we're doing it in the best way we can. But we have a real problem with the concentration of ownership of the media, by the control of the media by a very small number of global corporations, and the ability of them to prevent people talking to each other. Look at the ease with which access to social media and the internet was cut off from Indian farmers when they were demonstrating outside the Indian parliament. Look at what happens to other groups around the world when they're demonstrating against their governments that have the power to do that. We need more democracy in the media. We need access to media, but above all, we need our own media. Ronan and Tribune do a brilliant job, but the circulation is relatively small. People still rely far too much on Murdoch-inspired and Fox News type agendas in order to get their information. We win when people understand their own power and their own ability to change the world and change society. May Day is a time of hope. It was born out of struggle, but above all, it's a time of hope. May Day festivals actually predate much of the concept of the labour movement. May Day festivals were about a spring festival, about people coming together in a sense of hope. Hope of good crops, hope of a good year. Let's make sure this May Day is a turning point, is a time of hope. When we win the battles against fire and rehire, we win the battles against poverty and inequality, we win the battles against human rights abuses, and we build that world of peace, a world free from racism, and above all, a world fit for the next generation. Nadia, thank you very much for inviting me today.
Thank you, Jeremy. And we're going to end there. Solidarity, everybody.